you believe hellfire is literal or metaphorical?
Well, I think the Bible uses metaphors, and those metaphors have sharp teeth. And I think the reality of hell is far greater than the metaphors that are used to describe it, whether it being sulfur or fire or blackest darkness forever. All of the metaphors pale by comparison to the reality.
Okay, so you don't know if it's going to be fire or...
Well, no, the fire is a metaphor. So when the Bible uses the metaphor of fire, we should always recognize the metaphor for what it is intending to communicate to us. So when the Bible speaks of God's throne flaming with fire, we're not to think that God's throne is on fire. Rather, we're to understand the metaphor, that there's a comparison here that is in view. Likewise, when we read that there are lamps of fire before the throne of God, we're not to think that there are actual lamps of fire before the throne of God, because the Bible itself tells us not to think in that way. The Bible tells us what the lamps of fire represent. And, of course, the description that John gives, or the interpretation that John gives us in the text itself, is that these are the seven spirits of God. So we should always interpret the Scripture in the sense in which it's intended. Jesus no doubt used the metaphor of fire to get through to an obstinate people more concerned with their physical well-being than the eternal state of their souls. To be at enmity with the holy God, to experience not so much as a drop of water to assuage the thirst of such separation, is a fearful thing. And that's why fire is used as a metaphor to describe it. And of course, there's ample biblical precedent for interpreting the fire of hell metaphorically. Consider the words of James. He's the half-brother of Jesus. He described the human tongue as being set on fire by hell. Now, the tongue obviously does not mean that it's literally flaming with fire in his description. It's a metaphor communicating the danger of the tongue when it's used in the improper way.
Okay, I sure do appreciate your answer, Hank.
You got it. And by the way, when James, just to cash this out a little, he actually says the tongue is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. He goes on to say that it corrupts the whole person and sets the whole course of his life on fire and is itself set on fire by hell. Now, he obviously doesn't intend us to suppose that the tongue, which itself is a metaphor for human language, is a literal fire that literally sets on fire the whole course of one's life. Nor are human tongues literally set on fire by hell. Rather, James uses the language of fire as a metaphor for the destructive power of words so that he gets a message across that you can't mistake, and also he uses the language of fire as a metaphor for the destructive nature of hell. And the Bible, of course, uses the metaphor of fire in many other ways to describe godly jealousy, to describe sexual lust, to describe unbridled passion, and on it goes. So, no, these are metaphors to describe a very real circumstance, and that is a circumstance spoken of by Jesus Christ over and over again. There are only two kinds of people in the world: those who are going to be reconciled to God, not only in time, but also in eternity, and those who will forever be separated from Him. And that, of course, is the horror of hell. We were created for relationship with God, and hell is the absence of that very thing. And so while fire is a horror that we can relate to, it does not approach the horror of forever being separated from the goodness and the glory and the grace of God. I've written about this in my book, Afterlife, What You Need to Know About Heaven, the Hereafter, and Near-Death Experiences. Lee Strobel wrote the foreword to this book, and he says clear and compelling answers to what you'll face on the other side. Again, Afterlife available through the Ministry of the Christian Research Institute. You can order your copy on the World Wide Web at equip.org. You can write me at Post Office Box 8500, Charlotte, North Carolina, zip code 28271. And as always, Resource Consultants, they're standing by, 888-7000, and the letters C. I'll be right back with more answers to your questions.